The following is a Psych to Practice production.
Welcome to Beyond the Bot, AI and Mental Health. I'm Dan Florell, a professor at Eastern Kentucky University, and we are going to be continuing on this episode to talk about AI report writing. If you recall from our last episode, we got into a little bit of the weeds, really into AI report recommendations and a little bit into how to format different AI reports that are from the same student or for the same client for different audiences and kind of focused on that. So this time around, we're going to be more focusing on kind of the levels of use that you could still argue are AI assisted reports and what those exactly look like. But before we get into that, I want to introduce my co-host and partner in crime here. Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can get launched into more AI report writing discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Adam Lockwood at Kent State University. Conflict of interest, same as before. Report writing, subject matter expert for PAR. Yep.
So we're going to rely on people listening to our episodes sequentially as they build up. But, I think when we were talking about AI report writing, this is a huge issue, one that people continually talk to us about in our presentations. And fortunately, we are getting more knowledge about what those look like. And of course, there's a lot more products out there than ever before. And I just kind of go by, if you've gone to the NAS convention and you go down to the vending area over the last 3 years, it's like they are exponentially more and more new report writers, and frankly, ones that I think are better every year, at least what they claim to be able to do versus what the first ones 3 years ago were claiming. So real impressive. But I think we need to get a little into the weeds, a little more general versus particular products. And that is exactly, what are we considering AI assisted report writing? Adam, why don't you, because you run a lot of the research that we do in the field on AI, what would you consider kind of these different levels that we look at in regards to an AI assist for our reports?
Well, I mean, honestly, we've been using AI in our report writing for quite some time. So at the most basic level, it's things like Grammarly. Technically, Grammarly is artificial intelligence, and it's natural language processing, which is a similar technology to ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I always want to point out to people, and that a few people are caught off guard by, is that you should not be using Grammarly to help you with your reports unless you have an enterprise account, because it trains on the data you provide it. So if you're using it just for grammar, spelling, and editing, it's taking your sensitive data and using it for who knows what. So that's the first level, is this kind of Grammarly, grammar, spelling, checking, typos, and that's pretty low stakes from a clinical judgment, loss of skills perspective, but it can be high stakes from a data security, FERPA, HIPAA standpoint. So that's kind of like the first level I think of when I think of AI.
Well, yeah, so Grammarly, I get that. But what about like Microsoft Word, Google Docs? Because they do offer grammar, punctuation, spelling, help. That's not really, is that still considered AI? And would the same concerns apply when you're using those to write up the reports?
That's going to depend on a case-by-case basis. Spell check, typically, my understanding, I'm not a computer programmer, but it's not using this process.
Mm-hmm.
It's also not underlining sentences and being like, this sentence is a fragment, or, consider rewording and giving you suggestions. So it's a little bit different. At this point, though, AI is inserted into everything. You need to be careful. If you use Google, there's a good chance that Gemini, which is generative AI, is integrated into your Google Docs, into your spreadsheets, into every single component. The same for Word. Copilot is up in everything. So if you're a Google Workspace, a Google Campus, or a Microsoft Campus, you should definitely find out do we have an enterprise account? And if so, what can I use it? Ask someone in IT or legal or administration, is it okay for me to be using Gemini integrated, or is it okay for me to be using Copilot?
Well, I was going to say, because, back in the day, obviously Word and maybe some to lesser extent Google Docs, I mean, it resided on your computer. You could store it there, and Microsoft kind of lost control of it for the most part afterwards. But now they've put everything into Microsoft 360. And of course, Google has always resided into these cloud servers. And then, of course, they've been integrating their premier product, whether it's Copilot with Microsoft or Gemini with Google, into the products. Like, there's really not even a selection process. So I guess from a most basic, most conservative view, one should always have the enterprise or business level kind of access that most organizations people work for would have, with the caveat, of course, being if you're a solo private practice, that you probably don't have that level of protection in an individual account, or if you're using the free account, certainly not. In which case, I guess you would argue, Adam, that maybe they shouldn't be using that, or they should look into upgrading to a higher level where their materials aren't being used for training purposes or otherwise captured beyond what you're using it for.
I've consulted with people in private practice to help them get BAAs in place for Gemini, Copilot as well. It's a pain, but it's definitely doable, and it's something that I would do if I was in private practice for sure.
Okay. And is that something, what do you do? Ask AI kind of how to go about getting a BAA with those organizations or services?
It's been almost a year since the last time I did it, and it always changes on how you do it. But essentially, you get an enterprise account. You pay for a certain level of, a suite that is where they have a business associates agreement with you. They email you a document that says the BAA is in place. And, depending on your level of risk tolerance, for me, I think if I had that BAA, an email, I would be okay. I would be comfortable.
Right.
If I had something from Google, I always encourage people, get an email with the BAA saying that it's HIPAA compliant. I'm not a lawyer, so, I always give that caveat, but for my own level of comfort, I want something from the company if I'm in private practice, or I want something from someone in authority in my organization, whether that's IT, legal, or administration, saying, yes, you can use, this when you're working with students, or when you're using this with clients. And I'd save that email.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say that's one of those things you want documented. That's one also the advantage if you're working for a larger organization. So, for example, most school districts that have Google, that are a Google campus, they'll probably have the enterprise as part of it. And what I've heard anyway is that that makes it FERPA compliant. I haven't heard about HIPAA compliant, but in the schools, of course, the FERPA law is going to be the one that you would be more attended to anyway. I think we've given some people the things to think about in regards to the level of security, regardless of how innocuous the AI seems. It's kind of like it's seeped itself into areas that you hadn't previously had to worry about in the same way. So at the lowest level, you were talking about grammar, spelling, editing, suggestions. It's kind of your low level AI assisted report writer. What kind of levels come next in regards to kind of the gradient of relatively benign, basic writing help to, of course, at the very end would be writing the whole thing, giving a diagnosis and going on kind of thing? What are some of the things in between that people might start considering adopting? And as they're beginning to maybe embrace AI, I always tell people kind of let's go slowly, gradually integrate it within your practice to a point where you feel like you've either lost some of the specialization and skills that you need yourself, and also where you're comfortable ethically, legally from that standpoint.
I mean, you can parse it out into as many levels as you want, but you have your stoplight model, having it rewrite sentences that are like, gosh, I keep saying this in the same way. What's another way to say this? And it'll rewrite it for you. That's another pretty low stakes. I think the next step up is probably like summarizing, taking bigger chunks of stuff and condensing it, because it's still your own ideas, and it's not necessarily taking over clinical judgment. It's not generating new information. It's just summarizing. So that's kind of like maybe like in where you would put the yellow on your
Right.
stoplight.
On the model. Well, I was wondering, because you talked about one of the ways that you interact with AI now is doing the audio and just kind of almost a flow of thought, of kind of how your thoughts are flowing, and you just kind of talk it out. Yes. And then have it summarize that. And I would imagine that could be a style of report writing. I don't know if I could do that at this stage yet, because I have 20 some odd years of in my head while I'm typing, kind of doing that kind of dialogue. But I imagine, especially newer people in the field, I do know that talking things through with other clinicians about particular cases certainly helps me crystallize things. And I imagine the AI can very effectively kind of crunch down all the stuff that maybe you've been meandering and thinking about to a more concise thing that can lead to either you writing or incorporating within the report process.
I mean, I love AI as a thought partner, as someone to bounce ideas off or think about, how would this read to a parent? If you were a parent, how would this hit you? And it'll be like, well, honestly, this is pretty harsh. So in that regard, I like the back and forth.
Do
That's a lot.
you, and I'm gonna deviate a little bit, because I'm like, do you believe that its ability to mimic a particular persona is accurate with the actual personas that it's impersonating? So, for example, you mentioned, if you were a parent, how would you picture this? Now, it gives you feedback that you think maybe a parent would say. But I've also seen some research that says, because this is a little different area, because the research is generating AI related data to come up with conclusions about individuals or humans, right? In other words, it creates fictitious personas and gives results, but they've actually compared that to real results, and they find there's discrepancies. And so, is it a mistake for us to start trusting it as let's say, hey, I'm going to give this to Kentucky school psychologist. What would be some relatable stuff to talk about? Or if you were a Kentucky school psychologist, how would you respond to these items? And it somehow leads me astray. I'm just kind of curious, because I've seen some of that literature, at least from the research angle, that maybe says we probably shouldn't trust that type of use of AI.
Well, to your first point, if you met, the saying that if you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. If you met one parent, you met one parent. So, is it going to react the way that a parent in a meeting is going to react? I mean, you could practice on another parent and it would be different. So, there's no way to approximate or to, determine how any one person's going to respond. I've seen research that suggests that AI is very good for psychometric purposes, for basically substituting for human participants. Because it's trained on all of this on the internet, essentially, it does a pretty good job of approximating. I think you're always going to find one study that says one thing, one study that says another, and it's going to be depending on method and error, just probabilistically speaking. So I think that it just depends. But I think that practice is good, especially for a trainee, because part of that's getting over, I got to tell this parent that their child has a disability, and that's hard for a lot of people. It was for me. And just
Yeah.
the exposure, even though it's, it's not true exposure, it's a form of exposure. And I think that could be valuable.
No, I agree with you. I just sometimes want to play devil's advocate with our assumptions, right? Especially with AI. The moment you start assuming that this is an absolutely accurate rendering of fill in the blank. And I like that idea, of being able to bounce ideas against somebody and give, just tell the AI what type of background. You're an advertising executive, you're a marketing specialist, you're a special ed director, whatever it might be, and to maybe lend yourself another viewpoint or perspective, because you and I, from our psychological backgrounds, might think, oh, this is brilliant. This is a great way of viewing it. And then we ask about a parent's view, a teacher's view, and they're like, we don't understand this. Like, what is all this jargon you're throwing at us? And so it's valuable, but I didn't know because of concerns about hallucination and other sorts of things. Is that a way? Are we knowing more now on whether we can still trust that other perspective, or is that perspective just really not based in reality at all? And it sounds like from what you're saying, generally, yeah, for more generic purposes. Now, if I asked it to say, I've got to talk to Adam Lockwood and I need his opinions on things, I probably wouldn't trust the AI to be absolutely nail you down personality wise. Or maybe it actually would be really good because you've used AI so much that it knows you to a T and can mimic your behaviors.
Yeah, if you go and you look in most of the large language models, if you click the memory button, that's one of the new things that ChatGPT 5.6, which came out yesterday, people are listening to this later, you can click the memory button and it does this kind of like star wash, and then it'll tell you everything about you. And it's spot on scary. But as far as trust goes, I wouldn't trust AI. No, I wouldn't say trust is the right word. I would not trust it. I would always act as an expert in the loop and assume that whatever it's generating is going to have some hallucinations, because it will. It's going to make things up at times.
Well, I think that gets back to a good point regarding our AI kind of a continuum of AI report writing. So we've gone through a couple of levels with grammar and ed chatting, doing awkward language. We talked a bit about summarizations of interviews or thought processes. What would be next in your mind going up that kind of continuum?
I think maybe recommendations. Again, it's at this point it's starting to synthesize more. It's taking things from other places. So, and it's generating novel information. So it's a jump up. It is a jump up, but it's that generating recommendations, drafting sections, where you're actually kind of handing the keys over a little bit more. You still have a lot of, you should still be looking at the output quite a bit, but this is where you're getting into higher and a much more of a need for oversight, and also the possibility of your own skills becoming rusty.
Right. So this is you're getting more at these higher ends on I think of it as set it and forget it. Like, okay, here's the data, and I'm just going to go and put it into the grinder of AI, and then it's going to spit out this wonderful, curated hamburger meat or whatever it is that I'm making, or sausage or whatever. And I don't want to know other than when I plopped it in, it's just going to spit out, and I trust it innately, which I think we've discussed ad nauseum. Like, you can't trust the AI. You're going to have to know with your own clinical judgment. And so, is there particular profiles of school psychologists who might be able to use it in this kind of manner and still do it in an ethical, legal way? Or is there just no level where we wouldn't have to have some significant kind of hand in things?
Well, first of all, I think I skipped over a level, which is like, help me regenerate sections, which I think is a little bit, is like below that, where it's like, yes, Sean, you really dove in there. You were really, I almost said delve. Take me back to the older AI days when delve was always part of the output. But I think that's a little less than just straight up generating. But the kind of person who I think could be okay with that is your more seasoned school psychologist who is able to look over output and be like, yes, this is correct. This is where I do not want interns. I don't want even, quite honestly, people in their first or second year, personally, myself as a trainer, using AI for this, because they need to build those skills before they hand it over. And you've probably heard my spiel as I always think of AI as an intern.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a confident intern, and those are the worst kind of interns to have, you know?
Right.
The interns who are anxious, those ones are the best because they're like, I don't know, they're going to double, triple check. They're going to come to you with questions. They're going to say, I'm not sure. It's the one. You get that one every few years. And typically it's a he, in my experience. He might have worked as a teacher or something that makes him think that I got this, whatever it is. Maybe it's a personality. They're the ones that you have to really watch out for because they're going to be overly confident and they're going to get outside their lane. And so if you think about it like that, I don't want an intern supervising an intern. I don't want a first year school psychologist supervising. I don't want a second year supervising. And in fact, NASP has rules that you have to be practicing for a certain amount of time before you can be a supervisor. So I think if you think about it like that, those are the people who I don't want using AI for anything other than maybe rewording, grammar, things like that, unless they're using AI, they're writing first and then having AI and comparing the two. I think there can be value in that. But those are the people who I don't want to write. The people who might be okay with it are the people who do this so much that they don't need to build that skill. But even those people, Dan, I worry will lose those skills if they have AI write reports each and every time for the entire report. I think we're going to have to come up with some sort of rules, whether it's personal rules that you have or some guidance from NASP or the APA that is, do I write one section? Do I write 1 out of 10 reports? Because otherwise, you're going to lose those skills.
Yeah, I talk about that as what I call my foxtrot approach, which is, like quick, slow, except for, interns, it's slow, 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 quick, and it's a ratio really is what it gets at of how many do I do from AI, how many reports do I primarily do from scratch. And as you get more experience, the more you can do with AI and the fewer you need to do with scratch. But I think and I don't know if there's going to be a guidance that you can really have on it because it's almost a self-awareness. Like I know I've gone a little bit too far on a presentation or two relying on AI and I'm up there presenting and I do an okay job, right? I mean, it's not that I don't know the material. I don't know it at the level that I want to know it. And I've done this long enough when I'm just in sync with the material. Like I know this. People can throw whatever questions at me. I probably have the answer. I know the rationale behind it. And there were some points with a presentation or two, especially in an area that maybe I'm not as up to speed with in my background, that I over relied on it. And I didn't really fully realize it until I got in that situation. And then I've backpedaled, right? And I don't use it quite to that level for that type of purpose, in particular with topics I'm not as familiar with. And so I think report writing is going to be the same. You have to be aware of what you know and what you don't know. And a seasoned professional should know, like, yeah, I know this kid. I've written this report. I know this data. And, I'm very confident. But then if you go back to a scratch report and you're beginning to forget, like, oh, now what section did I put this in? You've probably gone too far in the reliance to AI, and you need to sit down and really carve out more time to do kind of those from scratch. But I can't tell you, as an expert in AI, and I'm sure you wouldn't either, if I take somebody and say I have 10 years of experience and I go, oh, okay, you're at a 5 AIs to 1 scratch ratio. Like, there's too much individual aspects to that. I think it's going to be just up to the professional. And I totally agree. I don't, up to the professional if you have 4 or more years experience. I think if you don't have at least 4 years of experience in the field, you shouldn't have the option of doing lots of AI, because the problem is not only will you be de-skilled, you will be no skilled because you probably didn't have the full skills in place. NASP has acknowledged that, right? Because we have all those domains. They're impossible to cover in 3 years or 2 years. And they acknowledge, like, you are continuing to learn this process well into your career, your first few years of the career. And so with the AI report writing, you need to view it the same way. You are not an expert report writer the minute you graduate. You're much better than a typical grad student, but you're not to a point where you could confidently offload a lot of this to AI. At least that's kind of the way I visualize and have explained it.
Well, your presentation example brings up another thing that I usually talk about when I present, and that is writing is not a passive endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
It's partially documentation, but it's partially where we formalize ideas. It's through living in those data, it's through writing that we come to understand a student or a client or a patient. And if we are completely outsourcing that, my thought is that we're not going to know the needs and strengths of those people because we're going through it too quickly. So yeah, I don't know where that balance lies, but I think it's something that people are going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I almost think of it as out of the loop in that model, and that I have a historian friend who talks about living within the context. And I think particularly with our reports, like, we need to live within the context of that data. And if we have an AI generate recommendations, I feel very confident if I've lived in that data to say whether those are good or bad personalized recommendations. If I haven't lived in that data, and I've offloaded all these other aspects of the report, when it comes to recommendations, what am I going by? I'm going by my generic, this is kind of like a second grader. Yeah, this seems appropriate, but maybe not for that second grader, right? I'm relying on a nomothetic or a kind of a norm-based thought process and not an ideographic, which is, to your point with AI, ideographic or the individual is really good at helping with that because it can take all these factors in and make it much more specific to the individual that we are assessing.
Absolutely. There's one more level, I think, Dan.
Okay, let's do one more level and then we're about out of time on this
Yeah, I think
episode.
that the last level is clinical judgment. That is, and it could, we already see this in risk prediction, but essentially that AI will make the decision of whether someone's eligible or as a service. And to me, that is a level of risk that to me is greater than even generated in the report. We know that these things have bias baked into them. We know that they hallucinate. And so I think you can have AI to help you map out, oh, here's some things that look like ADHD. Here's some things that, using it in that way, kind of like a thought partner, can be helpful. But for me to have AI say eligible or not eligible is a level that I'm not comfortable going myself.
So kind of like using AI maybe with diagnostic suggestions, though that's a slippery slope because maybe it doesn't consider something that you would, and you just kind of go, well, the AI didn't come up with that, so I guess it's not going to be that, depending on how good the AI is and what its suggestions are. But I'm thinking also to, for the BASC, if you look at report of the BASC, it gives recommendations of, like, here are different diagnoses, here are symptoms that they might meet. And if I just went by that, it doesn't cover everything, right? It doesn't cover a lot of different disorders that are even childhood disorders. It gives some options. I appreciate its feedback, but I also know, like, it's not going through the whole DSM. It's focusing on like 5 disorders and it tells you how likely. And if it's unlikely, it just doesn't include it in the printout. And so I'm worried because that's just a very basic understanding of how AI would be able to convey maybe the same options for you. And it's almost maybe better that you wait to have it give suggestions after you've struggled and come up with your own thought about what it might be. And then it may open your eyes to, oh, there are some other options I need to at least consider. But you've come to your own conclusion initially. So it's almost like the argument, do the work first, and then have AI come in and say, give me some other options that this could be given the data. And maybe in some cases, you'll be like, oh, how could I have not seen that? And I think that would be a better use of the AI report writer from a diagnostic sense, if that AI report writer even offers that, because there's a lot of report writers that are not going to go into that diagnostic. I think just liability wise, what if it makes the wrong diagnosis? Is it the clinician, or will it be the AI that gets sued? So they don't want to open themselves up to that type of liability either. I would think would be part of it.
I think the liability always falls on the practitioner. At least that's how I think of it. I think just the importance, the take homes I have is, if you use AI to write reports, know the data. Know the data very well. Do not blindly follow, and keep your clinical judgment. And then you're probably going to be in a better place. And that's easier said than done, because we're all so rushed. It's really easy to just want to be like, okay, do this for me. Great, it's done. Move on. But I think that will get you into trouble.
I totally agree with you, Adam. And I think that's a really good stopping point for this particular episode. And yet again, we've gotten through one little iota of the AI and report writing. So I have a feeling that we will have some future episodes certainly diving into more detail. But this is the end of our Beyond the Bot, AI and Mental Health. I hope you're enjoying these episodes and that you continue coming back. I know Adam and I have been enjoying chatting with one another about these issues, if nothing else. And hopefully you've gained some other insights that maybe go a little bit beyond just the trite little lists of things to consider. So we will see you for our next episode. Thanks.
Thank you.